What if a single video could decide the exact moment of your death? Most people think urban legends are just stories made to scare teenagers late at night. But some stories refuse to stay buried in the dark psychological voices from the beyond. Fear doesn't come from monsters hiding in the shadows. It comes from curiosity, from secrets, and from the terrifying idea that once you see something, you can never unsee it. Claire never believed the rumors surrounding the mysterious videotape, a cursed recording. 7 days until death. It sounded ridiculous until the phone rang. What begins as a simple investigation slowly turns into a nightmare filled with disturbing images, hidden messages, supernatural horror, and a truth so unsettling that even the people trying to solve it become trapped inside it. And the deeper Claire digs into the mystery behind Evelyn, the more reality itself starts to feel unstable. Because this isn't just a horror story about a curse. It's about fear spreading like a virus, infecting anyone who dares to look too closely at what should have remained forgotten. And before we go deeper into this disturbing mystery, take a second to support the channel. If you enjoy psychological horror, hidden meanings, dark movie analysis, and stories that stay in your mind long after the ending, leave a like on this video. It really helps more people discover content like this. And I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched a movie scene so unsettling that it stayed with you for days? Comment below and tell me the moment that genuinely creeped you out the most. I read every comment, and your experiences make these discussions even more powerful. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more deep horror breakdowns, suspense stories, and psychological thriller content that explores the darkest corners of your screen. Because what Claire discovers next is where the real nightmare truly begins. What makes the voice from the beyond so different from most supernatural horror movies is that the fear never arrives all at once. It slowly invades your mind. The movie understands that psychological horror becomes far more disturbing when it feels possible, when it hides itself inside ordinary things you see every single day. And honestly, that's why the cursed videotape became such an iconic part of horror cinema. It isn't some ancient artifact locked inside a haunted castle. It's just a tape, something normal, something familiar, something harmless. At least, that's what everyone believes in the beginning. The rumor spreads quietly between teenagers, like every urban legend does. Someone watches a strange recording. The phone rings immediately afterward. A distorted voice whispers that they have 7 days left to live. Then exactly 1 week later, they die under terrifying and unexplained circumstances. Most people laugh at the story because that's what people do when something scares them. They joke about it to feel safer. They pretend it's ridiculous, because accepting the possibility would be unbearable. The opening scenes feel strangely intimate because they capture something universal. We've all heard stories we pretended not to believe, while secretly hoping nobody would test them. Late night conversations, creepy chain messages, strange internet myths that feel fake until you're suddenly alone in the dark, thinking about them again. That's exactly the emotional space this psychological thriller traps the audience inside. It weaponizes imagination. Before anything supernatural even happens, the fear already exists inside the viewer's mind, and then the movie hits you with something deeply unsettling. The victims don't just die. Their faces are frozen in expressions of absolute terror, as if they witnessed something the human mind was never meant to process. There's no bloodbath, no dramatic attack scene, just pure psychological devastation. That detail changes everything because it makes the mystery feel darker than a normal horror story. Whatever killed them didn't simply take their lives. It broke them emotionally first. Claire enters this nightmare carrying emotional exhaustion of her own. She isn't introduced like a fearless investigator searching for paranormal answers. She feels human, overwhelmed, skeptical, tired of sensational stories and irrational fear. That's why her involvement becomes so compelling. She starts investigating only because the deaths are connected to someone close to her. And at first she approaches the mystery logically, almost coldly. She wants facts, explanations, evidence. The audience follows her because her reactions mirror our own. Every disturbing clue still seems explainable in the beginning. Maybe the teenagers overdosed. Maybe someone manipulated them psychologically. Maybe the urban legend itself caused panic strong enough to kill. But the deeper Claire investigates, the more the movie begins blurring the line between rational explanation and supernatural horror. Small details stop making sense. Witnesses describe impossible things. The atmosphere around the videotape itself feels wrong, almost contaminated. And then Claire finally decides to watch it herself. This moment is one of the most effective scenes in psychological horror history, because the movie refuses to explain the tape clearly. Instead, the audience experiences fragmented nightmare imagery that feels disconnected from reality. Flickering visuals, dark water, distorted movements, uncomfortable sounds. Images that seem meaningless individually but somehow feel emotionally violent when combined together. It's not traditional horror designed to shock you instantly. It's symbolic horror, the kind that crawls under your skin slowly and stays there long after the scene ends. And the truly terrifying part is what happens next. Claire finishes watching the tape, sits there confused, unsettled, trying to process what she just saw. And then the phone rings. That single moment changes the entire emotional direction of the film, because suddenly the urban legend becomes personal. No longer a mystery happening to strangers. No longer a creepy story safely separated from reality. Now the countdown has started for her too. And somewhere inside that growing silence, Claire begins realizing that curiosity may have led her directly into something far more dangerous than death itself. The moment the phone rings after Claire watches the videotape, the entire atmosphere changes. Up until then, the movie still leaves room for doubt. You can still convince yourself it's all coincidence, psychological manipulation, maybe even mass hysteria, but that phone call destroys the last sense of emotional safety. And what makes the scene so unforgettable isn't loud horror or sudden violence. It's the simplicity of it. A ringing phone, a quiet room, a voice that calmly whispers, 7 days. That's it. No explanation, no warning. Just a countdown quietly attaching itself to Claire's life like an invisible infection. And from that moment forward, the movie becomes something much darker than a supernatural mystery. It becomes a psychological prison. Every second suddenly matters. Every strange sound feels threatening. Every reflection, every television screen, every shadow in the room starts carrying emotional weight. The audience experiences the curse alongside Claire because the film traps us inside the same paranoia, consuming her mind. That's what makes this horror story so effective. Fear no longer lives in isolated scenes. It follows the characters constantly. Claire tries to stay rational at first. She forces herself to believe there's still a logical explanation behind everything, but you can already see fear beginning to crack through her composure. And honestly, that fear feels painfully human, because when people lose control over a situation, they cling harder to logic. They search for patterns. They need answers. Claire becomes obsessed with understanding where the videotape came from, who created it, and why every victim dies exactly 7 days later. Not because she's curious anymore, but because understanding the curse may be the only way to survive it. That desperation pulls Ethan into the investigation. Unlike Claire, Ethan approaches the mystery with cautious skepticism, but even he can't deny the disturbing details piling up around them. Together, they begin tracing the origins of the tape, and this is where the psychological horror deepens in a brilliant way. The movie slowly transforms ordinary investigation scenes into moments filled with dread. Looking through photographs becomes unsettling. Watching old footage feels dangerous. Even simple conversations carry hidden tension, because the audience understands something the characters desperately want to ignore. Time is running out, and while Claire searches for answers externally, something even more disturbing starts happening inside her own home. Lucas begins behaving strangely, quietly, subtly. He says things that feel emotionally wrong for a child his age, almost as if he senses the curse moving around them long before Claire fully accepts it herself. There's something deeply unsettling about the way he watches her, the way he speaks with unnatural calmness, as though he understands horrors adults refuse to confront. The movie uses Lucas perfectly, because children in psychological horror often represent vulnerability, innocence, and hidden truth all at once. And every scene involving him creates this growing fear that the curse may already be spreading beyond Claire. Silence becomes terrifying. Empty spaces feel contaminated. The cursed videotape itself starts feeling less like an object and more like a living presence quietly manipulating everyone connected to it. And the more Claire investigates the disturbing imagery inside the tape, the more impossible coincidences begin surrounding her reality, until eventually she realizes something horrifying. The images aren't random at all. They're fragments of a story, pieces of trauma, clues left behind by someone who desperately wanted to be seen. And hidden somewhere inside those distorted visions is the beginning of a truth far more disturbing than the curse itself. As Claire and Ethan dig deeper into the origins of the cursed videotape, the investigation stops feeling like reality and starts feeling like a descent into something emotionally contaminated. And this is where the movie becomes truly brilliant as psychological horror, because the deeper they search for answers, the more the world around them begins changing in subtle but terrifying ways. Nothing feels stable anymore. The curse doesn't attack directly at first. It distorts perception. It infects thoughts. It slowly destroys the boundary between normal life and nightmare. The disturbing images from the tape begin appearing everywhere. A ladder leaning against a wall suddenly feels threatening. Reflections in mirrors seem wrong for a split second too long. Water becomes a recurring symbol of fear. And what makes this supernatural horror so effective is that the audience starts experiencing the same paranoia as Claire. You begin searching every frame for hidden meaning because the movie trains your mind to believe that every image matters. Every shadow feels intentional. Every strange sound feels connected to something larger. Waiting beneath the surface, Claire becomes obsessed with decoding the videotape because she realizes the horrifying visuals aren't random at all. They're fragmented memories, symbols tied to someone's trauma. And the more she studies them, the more she notices impossible connections between the tape and real locations, real people, real tragedies. That's the terrifying evolution of the curse. It transforms from an urban legend into evidence of something that once lived, suffered, and somehow continues existing through recorded images. The videotape itself begins feeling less like a cursed object and more like a cry for recognition from something buried and forgotten. Meanwhile, Ethan starts noticing changes in Claire herself. Her exhaustion deepens. Her emotions feel disconnected. Fear slowly replaces logic, even when she tries pretending otherwise. There's a scene where she stares silently at static on a television screen, and it captures something psychologically disturbing about the film. The curse doesn't just threaten death, it isolates people emotionally before it destroys them. Claire becomes trapped inside her own mind, unable to explain what she's experiencing because none of it sounds rational anymore. But the most unsettling presence in the entire story continues to be Lucas. Every scene involving him feels emotionally wrong in a way that's difficult to explain. He speaks softly, calmly, almost like someone carrying knowledge far beyond his age. Instead of reacting like a frightened child, he behaves as though he's observing the curse from a distance, understanding rules nobody else fully sees yet. And that creates a unique type of psychological fear, because children in horror movies are supposed to seek protection from adults. Lucas feels different. At times, it almost seems like Claire is the vulnerable one while he quietly watches events unfold with terrifying awareness. One of the most disturbing moments comes when Lucas begins drawing images connected to the videotape without ever seeing certain details himself. That detail changes everything emotionally, because now the curse no longer feels contained. It's spreading through memory, through emotion, through proximity itself. And suddenly Claire is no longer fighting only for her own survival. She's terrified that whatever lives inside the tape may already be reaching toward her son. The environments themselves begin reflecting psychological decay. Dark hallways feel endless. Rooms seem colder. Faces look drained of warmth. The movie creates this constant sensation that something invisible is standing just outside the frame, watching the characters move closer and closer toward a truth they are emotionally unprepared to face. And every new clue about the mysterious girl connected to the tape only makes the horror feel more tragic, more personal, more disturbingly human, until Claire and Ethan finally discover the name hidden beneath all the fragmented images and drowned memories. Evelyn, a child whose story may explain not only the curse, but the unbearable suffering that created it in the first place. The moment Claire and Ethan uncover Evelyn's identity, the voices shifts from supernatural mystery into something emotionally devastating, because up until this point, the curse feels like pure horror, an unstoppable force, spreading fear through death, and psychological torment. But the deeper they investigate Evelyn's past, the more the movie forces both the characters and the audience to confront a disturbing possibility. What if the monster was once a victim? And honestly, that question changes the emotional weight of the entire story. Evelyn is no longer just the shadowy figure, hidden behind distorted videotape images. She becomes real, a lonely child surrounded by fear, isolation, and emotional abandonment. The investigation slowly reveals that strange things happened around her long before the videotape existed. Animals reacted violently in her presence. People around her became emotionally unstable. Her mother, overwhelmed by terror and confusion, stopped seeing her as a daughter and began seeing her as something unnatural. And that detail is deeply unsettling because psychological horror becomes far more powerful when it's connected to human pain instead of simple evil. The film starts exploring one of the darkest fears imaginable, the fear of being rejected by the people meant to protect you. Evelyn wasn't hidden away because anyone understood her. She was hidden because nobody could. That emotional isolation sits underneath every terrifying moment in the movie. Beneath the supernatural curse, beneath the disturbing imagery, beneath the deaths and nightmares, there's still the story of a child whose suffering grew into something unbearable. The closer Claire gets to understanding Evelyn, the more complicated the curse becomes, because now the videotape feels less like random evil and more like an emotional echo of trauma, refusing to stay buried. Every disturbing image suddenly carries meaning. The water, the isolation, the distorted faces, the silence, they're fragments of suffering trapped inside memory itself. And Claire begins emotionally unraveling under the weight of that realization. She wanted answers because she believed answers could stop the nightmare. But understanding Evelyn only pulls her deeper into it. The investigation starts affecting her relationship with Lucas, who continues displaying disturbing awareness about the curse. There are moments where he speaks about death with unsettling calmness, almost as if he already accepts truths adults spend their entire lives trying to avoid. And that creates this lingering psychological tension hanging over every scene. Claire isn't just racing against time anymore. She's terrified that the darkness surrounding Evelyn may emotionally consume her son too. Meanwhile, Ethan becomes increasingly uneasy about how obsessed Claire has become. The videotape is no longer just evidence to her. It's personal, compulsive, almost hypnotic. And the film subtly suggests something horrifying. The curse wants to be understood. It wants attention. It spreads through curiosity, grief, fear, and emotional vulnerability. That's why the horror feels so intimate. The characters aren't being hunted physically at first. They're being drawn inward, psychologically, closer and closer to the center of Evelyn's pain. And just when Claire starts believing she may finally be close to helping the tortured spirit behind the curse, new discoveries begin pointing toward something even darker, hidden beneath Evelyn's tragic past. Something that suggests the nightmare surrounding the videotape was never simply about revenge. And if you've made it this far into the story, comment the word static below, because the next part changes everything we thought we understood about the curse.
By the time Claire and Ethan reach the place connected to Evelyn's death, the atmosphere feels completely suffocating. The investigation is no longer about solving a mystery. It feels like they're walking directly into the emotional center of the curse itself. And what makes these scenes so powerful in psychological horror is the overwhelming sense that every answer comes with a terrible price. The closer they get to the truth, the more the movie strips away any illusion of safety. Even silence feels dangerous now. When they finally uncover what happened to Evelyn, the tragedy becomes almost unbearable. Claire realizes that Evelyn didn't simply die forgotten. She suffered in complete isolation, trapped between fear, rejection, and something unnatural growing inside her that nobody could control or understand. The discovery hits Claire emotionally because, for the first time, she stops seeing Evelyn as a supernatural threat and starts seeing the terrified child beneath the horror. And that shift matters, because the film manipulates both the characters and the audience into believing empathy might break the curse. That hope changes everything emotionally. After so much dread, so much paranoia, so much psychological tension, the movie suddenly gives viewers something dangerous: relief. Claire believes that if Evelyn's remains are finally found and acknowledged, maybe her spirit can rest. Maybe the suffering can finally end. And honestly, the film wants the audience to believe that too. It creates this fragile, emotional calm after relentless supernatural horror, almost like taking a breath after being underwater too long. The imagery during these scenes feels strangely peaceful compared to the darkness that came before. The rain softens, the tension quiets. Claire cradles Evelyn's remains with compassion instead of fear. And for a brief moment, it genuinely feels like the nightmare may finally be over. That emotional transition is incredibly important because it lowers the audience's defenses at exactly the right time. The movie carefully convinces you that understanding the victim was the key all along. But then something subtle begins feeling wrong. Not immediately, not dramatically, just small emotional fractures appearing beneath the surface. Ethan notices it first. The atmosphere doesn't feel lighter the way it should. Claire's exhaustion hasn't disappeared. Lucas still behaves with disturbing calmness, almost as if he already understands a truth the adults refuse to accept. And the psychological horror slowly begins rebuilding itself in the background. That's what makes the film so terrifying. It understands that dread is more effective when it returns quietly. Then comes the realization that completely changes the meaning of everything that happened before. Evelyn never wanted peace. The videotape was never a cry for help. It was a mechanism, a transmission, a way to continue spreading itself from person to person. And suddenly, all those disturbing images inside the tape become horrifyingly clear. The curse survives because people share it. Curiosity keeps it alive. Fear keeps it moving. Every victim becomes part of the cycle. This revelation transforms the story from supernatural mystery into existential horror. Because now, the audience is forced to confront a terrifying moral dilemma. Survival itself may require sacrificing someone else. The curse doesn't just threaten death, it corrupts human behavior. It pushes ordinary people toward impossible choices. And Claire finally understands the horrifying reasons some victims survived while others didn't. They passed the tape on. That realization hits like emotional whiplash because it destroys the comforting idea that compassion alone could solve the nightmare. Evelyn's suffering created something far darker than revenge. The curse evolved into pure continuation. An endless chain of psychological infection moving through images, technology, memory, and fear itself. And the moment Claire fully understands what survival may demand from her, the fear inside the story changes completely, because now the greatest threat isn't the videotape anymore. It's what desperate people are willing to do in order to escape it. Once Claire understands how the curse truly survives, the horror becomes painfully human. Until this moment, the audience is terrified of Evelyn, terrified of the videotape, terrified of the supernatural force moving silently through screens and distorted images. But now the fear shifts somewhere even darker, into morality, into guilt, into the terrifying instinct to survive no matter the cost. Claire realizes that the people who escaped death didn't defeat the curse, they transferred it. They copied the tape, showed it to someone else, and passed the nightmare forward like an emotional disease. And suddenly, the film forces viewers into an uncomfortable psychological question. If your life depended on condemning another person, what would you do? The monster is no longer just supernatural. The monster becomes desperation itself. There's no giant battle, no dramatic exorcism, no heroic victory. Just a growing realization spreading across Claire's face as she understands the horrifying choice now sitting in front of her. Save herself and Lucas, or refuse to continue the cycle and risk losing everything. And the movie never gives the audience emotional comfort because there is no clean answer. Survival here comes attached to corruption. At the same time, Ethan's fate delivers one of the most unforgettable moments in psychological horror cinema. The curse finally reaches him, and the scene works because the movie barely shows anything directly. The television flickers, static fills the room. Evelyn emerges slowly from the screen itself, moving with unnatural silence, bending reality around her presence. And what makes the scene terrifying isn't violence, it's inevitability. Ethan realizes there's no escaping what's coming. His face freezes in absolute horror, the same unbearable expression seen on every previous victim. And in that moment, the audience understands the true meaning of the curse. Once fear enters your mind, it never fully leaves. But the most chilling part comes afterward. Claire doesn't collapse emotionally. She acts quietly, mechanically. She helps Lucas copy the videotape, fully accepting what must happen next. And that final decision transforms the entire movie into something far more disturbing than a supernatural thriller. The curse continues, not because Evelyn is powerful, but because human fear keeps feeding it. Every terrified person becomes another link in the chain. Every attempt to survive guarantees new victims somewhere else. And that's why the ending stays inside people's minds. Because beneath the supernatural horror, beneath the disturbing imagery and psychological tension, the film leaves us staring at a deeply uncomfortable truth about fear itself. Once something truly terrifying enters the world, people rarely destroy it. They pass it on. If you made it all the way to the end of this psychological horror journey, then chances are this story stayed with you in some way. Maybe it made you uncomfortable. Maybe it made you think differently about fear, trauma, or the dark power hidden inside urban legends and supernatural horror. So before you leave, subscribe to the channel if you love deep movie analysis, disturbing mysteries, horror breakdowns, and psychological thriller stories that stay in your mind long after the ending. And I want you to comment the phrase "fear spreads" if this story truly got under your skin. I genuinely want to see how many people felt the same tension and emotional dread while watching this masterpiece. Don't forget to leave a like because it helps the channel reach more horror fans like you. And right now, another dark and disturbing video is appearing on your screen. Trust me, if this story unsettled you, the next one goes even deeper.